Hello everyone. Let's take a pause right here before diving any deeper. I know what you're thinking. Sounds like another sad story about a retiree, right? But the truth is that this entire account comes from a massive email I received from an anonymous follower who decided to empty his soul and share the experience that changed his life forever. Like I always do, I've edited the names and novelized the details to protect his identity. But I will tell it to you from my own perspective, putting myself in his shoes so that we can live this roller coaster together. Get ready. Because what begins as a portrait of a suffocating loneliness will soon transform into one of the most brilliant and calculated psychological revenges I have witnessed in a long time. Every single morning started exactly the same. I'd wake up at 5. It was a habit built over 43 years working as a freight dispatcher. Even though I'd been retired for 11 years, my internal clock still ticked to the rhythm of the town's shipping schedules. Sometimes I just laid in bed, listening to the old house creak, like it was complaining about the same arthritis we both suffered from. My name is Arthur Vance, and I was 75 years old. Tomorrow I'd turn 76, if anyone cared. I had my doubts. Our house on Elm Street was the last in a row of identical cottages built back in the 60s. Claire and I had once considered it a temporary shelter. In 5 years, we'll move to that 2-story house on the avenue, she used to say. But 5 years turned into 10, then 20, and then Claire was gone. Her heart gave out. She was only 68. I had been living alone for 8 years. 8 years of having breakfast with the newspaper instead of my wife. That morning, my oatmeal was a little too salty, just like always. I never could get the hang of cooking for one. "We're not doing great, Arthur," I told my reflection in the window pane. "You're getting old." The reflection didn't argue. I had less grey hair than I wanted and way more wrinkles than I needed. My eyes were still green like Claire's, but now they looked faded by time and quiet rooms. After breakfast, I went out to the yard. The weather in town that day was the same as always, neither good nor bad. Our town was like that. Neither too big nor too small. I was born here. I suppose I'll die here too. Claire wanted us to move to the city to be closer to Valerie when I retired, but I refused, and now I think I should have listened. Maybe my daughter wouldn't be so cold if we lived closer. Valerie is our only child. She's a beautiful, smart woman. She got a good job, married an accountant, and had Chloe. But when it came to me, she always sounded tired, like I wasn't her father. But a chore she was patiently putting up with. Folks, if I'm being honest, this is one of the cruelest realities of getting older. I look back at this and I clearly see how the power dynamic shifts. Children become the managers of their parents' lives. It's an emotional distance that cuts like ice. Have you ever felt like your very existence is a bother to the people you love the most? It's a dull ache that slowly snuffs out your soul. "Dad, we can't make it this weekend. Chloe has a competition." "Dad, did you forget to take your pills? I left the schedule on the fridge again." "Dad, do you have to call so late?" Since Claire passed away, I had turned into a burden for them. Sometimes I figured Valerie only checked in to see if I was still breathing, so she wouldn't miss the chance to sell the house. I pruned the bushes, even though my knees were screaming. It's an old habit, keeping things in order. Down at the shipping company, I was in charge of the paperwork and the cargo manifests. 30 crates of bolts, 20 barrels of machine oil, 48 boxes of spare parts. Everything had to fit perfectly, right down to the last nut. "Old man Vance knows every gear in this company," Mr. Rivers, the owner, used to say. There was no company left now. Mr. Rivers had passed away a long time ago, and I was just pruning bushes so the neighbours wouldn't complain. Mrs. White from the house across the street waved at me. She was over 80, but she still drove her old car and played bingo twice a week. I nodded back. We hardly ever spoke, but there was more warmth in that little gesture than in the last 5 phone conversations I'd had with my daughter. Around noon, my back started acting up, so I went inside, pulled yesterday's soup out of the fridge, heated it up, and sat in front of the TV. The news was on, followed by a commercial for arthritis medication, and then another one, this time for constipation. It was an industry that knew its audience perfectly at that time of day. Suddenly the phone rang, a rare thing on a weekday. Dad. Valerie's voice sounded like she was talking to a toddler. Do you remember tomorrow is your birthday? Like I could forget. At my age, every new year was a genuine milestone. Of course I remember, I answered. We'll be at your place around 3. Don't cook anything. I'm bringing the cake. Is everyone coming? I asked, feeling a lump in my throat. Had they really remembered after all? There was a pause. Yes, everyone. Me, Frank, Chloe, and Jack. Jack had been Chloe's husband for the past 4 years, a tall kid with more ambition than opportunity. He wanted to open a hotel, but he was working as a manager at a motel on the outskirts of town. Chloe had met him in college. She looked just like Claire. She had the same green eyes, the same dimple on her right cheek, but her personality was a carbon copy of Valerie's. She had a sharp tongue and a cold stare. Thank you, I told her. I'll be waiting for you guys. And Dad, her voice shifted into professional mode. Don't start with your work stories. Yeah, nobody wants to hear about your freight expertise and your shipping routes. I swallowed the resentment. The last time, I had only mentioned how I saved a company from a massive fine by catching a paperwork error. It was a story I was proud of. That time, Frank had yawned right in my face. All right, I replied. No stories. Great. See you tomorrow. And she hung up, without even waiting for my goodbye. I worked at the shipping company from the time I was 22 until I turned 65. I started as a basic warehouse guy, but I moved up fast to freight dispatcher. I had a good memory and paid attention to the details. I remembered every route, every client, every type of shipment. Mr. Rivers, the founder, valued those traits. Vance is my right hand, he'd tell the other guys. I was there when the company went from a small warehouse on the edge of town to a major regional carrier. I was there when Mr. Rivers' son took over after his dad died. I was there when the company bought its own fleet of 15 trucks. And I was also there when it got sold to a massive national corporation that shut our office down 2 years later, leaving 30 people out of a job. I was already retired by then, but I kept up with the company news. A lot of my buddies had moved away looking for work. Some took early retirement. Others started their own businesses, and I stayed in town with Claire in our little house on Elm Street. I was thinking about all of that while I cleaned out my bedroom closet. I found old shirts I hadn't worn in ages, sweaters Claire had knitted, the suit I wore to her funeral. Everything held the memory of a past that seemed to drift further away with every passing day. At the bottom of the closet, I found a box of photographs. There were snapshots of company parties, picnics, group outings, people who had already died or moved away. They were events nobody remembered anymore, a history that only mattered to me. I pushed the box aside and kept cleaning. On the top shelf behind a stack of old magazines, I found an album I'd been looking for months. It was filled with family photos from the last 30 years. Here was Valerie and Frank on their wedding day. Here was Chloe. a newborn at the hospital. Here was Claire and I holding her in our arms, our only granddaughter. Chloe was an incredible little girl, curious, full of life, with a laugh that caught like wildfire. When she was little, she loved coming to our house on weekends. We'd read stories, bake cookies, and take her to the park to feed the ducks. She called me Grandpa and would climb into my lap when I told stories about my job. When did things change? At what age did she go from being my loving granddaughter to a cold stranger? At 12, at 13, or did it happen gradually without me even noticing? I turned the pages of the album, watching her face change from one picture to the next. Here she was at 5, flashing a toothless grin. Here she was at 10, the smile getting a little more guarded. By 15, the smile was gone completely, replaced by a tense, sideways glare. The last pages held her wedding photos. There was Jack Nolan, tall, skinny, with a dreamer's look in his eyes. They had met in college, in the business department. He was always talking about his dream of opening a small, cozy hotel, not like those faceless corporate monsters, but a place with character, where every guest feels special, he would explain. But for now, that was still just a dream. He worked as a manager at a highway motel, saving up cash for a down payment on the right building. Chloe, who worked at an advertising agency, supported him at first. Jack is a visionary, she used to tell us. He has a real plan. But as the years dragged on, the plan stayed on paper. And I noticed my granddaughter's attitude shifting. First it was a mild irritation, then open resentment. At family gatherings, she started interrupting her husband more and more whenever he brought up his hotel. "Let's not do this tonight, okay?" she would say in a tone that shut down any argument. I understood Jack better than anyone else in the family. I once had a dream of starting my own shipping company too, but I never took the leap. I stayed at the freight office, where everything was safe and steady. I provided for my family. I saved up for Valerie's college fund. I saved up for a secure retirement. And now, looking back, I sometimes wondered what would have happened if I had just rolled the dice. I closed the album and put it back on the shelf. I had to keep cleaning. My family was coming tomorrow. And I wanted the house to look decent, though, to be honest, I highly doubted they'd even notice. My relationship with Valerie had gotten harder and harder since Claire died. She called once a week. Sundays at 6 sharp, the conversation was always the same. "How are you, Dad?" "I'm fine." "And you?" "I'm fine." Chloe got a promotion. Frank took on extra hours with his clients. I'm thinking about repainting the kitchen. There were no real questions about my life, no genuine interest. It was just a chore. Whenever I tried to talk about my issues, the back pain, the side effects of a new medication, the argument with a neighbor over the fence, she listened with barely hidden impatience. "Yeah, Dad, it's tough. Look, I gotta go. Chloe has a presentation or a competition or a meeting today." I stopped sharing my life. Why bother busy people with my old man problems? They didn't come around very often, just Thanksgiving, Christmas, and my birthday. Sometimes on Claire's birthday, when I asked them to come to the cemetery with me. The visits were always short, like they were just clocking in to do their duty. Frank, Valerie's husband, was an accountant with his own practice. He was always busy, always had a calculator running in his head, tallying everything up, the cost of the gifts, the gas he burned driving to my house, the time invested in visiting us. Once I heard him tell Valerie, 2 hours there, 2 hours back, 3 hours at his place. That's 7 hours of our lives we'll never get back. Listen closely to this. Here is where we hit rock bottom on the empathy scale. Frank looks at his family and sees a spreadsheet. He turns shared time into a deficit, a net loss. I ask you, how do you react when you find out your own blood measures you in cost and benefit? That sentence isn't just a complaint, it's an X-ray of an absolutely empty heart. I wasn't sure if he loved Valerie or if she loved him. They lived next to each other, but they weren't together. They were like two satellites in parallel orbits that never collided, but never drifted too far apart either. Chloe and Jack were different. There was still fire in them, a passion for life, for each other, for their dreams. But I could also see a crack growing between them. He still believed in his hotel. She was getting more and more drowning in doubt. During their last visit on Christmas Day, I heard them talking in the kitchen. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, I was just going to grab a glass of water, and I froze when I heard Jack's name. "How much longer are you going to wait?" Chloe asked. "It's been 4 years, Jack 4, and you're still stuck at that disgusting motel with the leaky roof." "I've almost saved up enough money," he answered. "1 more year, 2 at the most, and we can start." "A year or 2, she repeated bitterly. "And then the renovations, the decorating, the marketing. 3 more years. I'll be 35 by then, Jack. 35. And you know I want to have kids. We could start right now in a studio apartment with your salary and your loans. Be realistic." I quietly walked back to the living room, not wanting to hear the rest of the fight. I felt sorry for both of them. Chloe wanted stability and a family. Jack was clinging to his dream. In a way, I saw my younger self in him, except I didn't even have his guts to keep believing no matter what. That night I sat out on the porch watching the neighbours. The Castillo family across the street, a young couple with 2 kids. Mrs. White walking her old dog. The teenagers on bikes, riding back from the baseball field. Life kept moving all around me, and I was just a spectator. Tomorrow I would turn 76. It wasn't a milestone number, but at my age every birthday could be the last. Would they remember me when I was gone, or would they just breathe a sigh of relief that they didn't have to make these forced visits anymore? I watched the sunset dip behind the rooftops and thought about Claire. She would know exactly what to say. She always found the right words. "Don't judge them so harshly, Arthur," she would say. "They have their own lives, their own problems. They love you. They just don't know how to show it." I wished I could believe her. I wanted to think that deep down Valerie was still that little girl who hugged me when I came home from work, that Chloe still remembered when we baked chocolate chip cookies together. But with every passing year, it got harder and harder to believe. Before going to bed, I set some old photo albums out on the coffee table. Maybe Chloe would be interested in our family history. Maybe she'd see pictures of her great-grandparents and notice how much she looked like them. Maybe that would help us find some common ground. I braced myself for tomorrow with a hope I couldn't push down despite a lifetime of past letdowns. 76 years. I had spent most of them working to provide for my family, buying Valerie the dresses she wanted, saving for her tuition, helping them with the down payment on their house. And now, what? A phone call a week and a birthday visit. I went to sleep thinking about tomorrow. What kind of cake would Valerie bring? Would Chloe be staring at her watch the whole time, waiting for the exact minute they could leave? Would anyone notice the new painting I'd hung in the living room? A seascape that reminded me of the trip Claire and I took to the coast. In the morning, I'll get up at 5, just like I always do. I'll make myself a special breakfast. I'll put on my weekend shirt, a gift Claire gave me for our last birthday together. And I'll wait. And I'll wait to see if maybe, just maybe, this time will be different. Maybe this time they'll actually want to be here with me, their father and their grandfather. The morning of my birthday started like always at 5 o'clock sharp. I woke up before the alarm even went off. For a few minutes I just lay there staring at the ceiling. 76 years. It's a heavy number. Most of my buddies from high school had already passed that mark. Ray, my old co-worker, used to joke, after 70, every day is a bonus level in the game of life. I got up, threw on an old robe, and went to the kitchen. The house was dead quiet. Only the old clock on the wall was ticking away the seconds of my isolation. Claire always made a special breakfast on my birthday. Pancakes with honey and fresh berries. After she died, I tried to replicate the recipe, but it just never came out right. This year I decided not to torture myself, so I made what I actually knew how to cook: scrambled eggs, bacon, and toast. I turned the radio on. Jazz was playing slow and moody. Claire would have loved it. She always said jazz was the music of life, with all its highs and lows. "Happy birthday, Arthur," I said to my reflection in the window. It stared back with the same tired expression it wore every morning. After breakfast, I took a shower and put on my shirt for the day. It was pale blue with pearl buttons, Claire's gift for our last birthday together. She passed away 3 months after that. I combed my hair, though there wasn't much left to comb. At 9 in the morning, I checked the mailbox. Just some bills and junk mail, not a single card. At 10, Ray called the only guy who still remembered my birthday without anyone having to remind him. Well, 76, old friend. His voice boomed over the phone. "How does it feel?" "Like I'm still 60, only my body strongly disagrees," I replied. We talked about his grandkids, fishing, how the city had changed. Not one word about my family. He knew it was a sore subject. "Are they coming today?" he finally asked, treading carefully. "Yeah, they said they'd be here around 3. "Well, that's great. Give them my best," he said, lacking any real conviction. Ray knew how things were. After hanging up, I made the final preparations. I dusted the pictures on the mantel. I arranged the photo albums on the coffee table and bought a pack of Chloe's favourite chocolate chip cookies. I remembered how she used to devour them when she was little. Maybe she still remembered. By 2 in the afternoon, I started glancing out the window, even though I knew they had said around 3. By 3, I was getting anxious. By 4, I started thinking they had forgotten or just decided not to show up. At 4:30, when I had pretty much given up hope, Frank's car pulled up. A brand new model, bought on credit, just the way he liked to show off. They all walked in together, loud, completely wrapped up in their own world. Valerie carried a small cake in a cardboard box from the supermarket. Frank immediately parked himself in a chair like he owned the place. Chloe, looking beautiful and dressed in expensive clothes, but carrying her mother's exact same icy stare, gave me a quick peck on the cheek. She smelled like very expensive perfume. "Happy birthday, Grandpa," she said, without an ounce of enthusiasm. Jack, her husband, shook my hand firmly. There was a tension in him that hadn't been there before. "Happy birthday, Mr. Vance," he said. At least he was the only one who sounded like he meant it. "Dad, sorry we're late," Valerie said, not looking particularly guilty. Traffic was terrible today. I nodded, even though I knew the roads around town were always dead on a Wednesday afternoon. They had simply taken their sweet time. It's fine. The important thing is that you're here. They handed me a gift. It was an electric razor in a basic box, no wrapping paper, nothing festive. From all of us, Valerie said. I thanked them, even though I already had the exact same one which they had given me 3 years ago. They had probably forgotten or just couldn't be bothered to remember. Valerie buzzed around the kitchen, setting out the paper plates she had brought, like she was afraid of dirtying my real dishes. Chloe sat on the couch, her eyes glued to her phone. Jack shifted awkwardly from foot to foot, clearly feeling completely out of place. Frank flipped through a magazine he'd found on the table, not even trying to make conversation. "How are things at the motel?" I asked Jack, trying to cut through the heavy air. "Fine," he answered shortly. Same old, same old." "Oh, and how are the plans for the hotel coming along?" Chloe snapped her head up from her phone. "Grandpa, we are not talking about that today," she said, in a tone that dared anyone to push back. I saw Jack's jaw clench. Something was definitely going on between them. "Sure," I replied, feeling incredibly awkward. "How's work at the agency, Chloe?" "Great," she said, dropping her eyes back to her screen. "Lots of new clients." That was the entire conversation. I tried a couple more times. I asked Frank about his accounting firm, Valerie about her volunteer work at the library. I only got clipped answers and then more silence. Finally, Valerie walked back in with a cake holding 13 lit candles. "We couldn't find any more," she explained, "but it's symbolic. 7 and 6, 76. I didn't bother pointing out that 7 and 6 add up to 13, not 76, and that her excuse made absolutely zero sense. What did it matter? They sang Happy Birthday while literally checking their watches. Their voices sounded robotic, like they were fulfilling a mandatory court order. I blew out the candles, making a wish that would never come true for this family to actually be a family again. The cake tasted like cardboard. The frosting was pure plastic. I ate my slice, complimenting Valerie on her excellent choice. She wasn't even listening to me. She was arguing with Frank about some work problem. Chloe kept typing away on her phone, not even touching her slice. Jack ate in silence, glancing over at his wife every now and then. Do you guys remember I started catching a brief pause in the room? When we all went up to the lake for my 50th birthday, Chloe caught her first fish that trip. "Dad," Valerie interrupted. "We agreed no nostalgic stories." I shut my mouth, swallowing the bitter taste in my throat. Chloe didn't even look up from her phone. By the way, Frank said, tapping his watch, "We need to leave in half an hour. We have theatre tickets for 7. "The theatre?" I asked, stunned. "On my birthday, Dad." Valerie sighed. "We bought these tickets a month ago. We couldn't just skip it." "Of course not," I nodded. "Of course not." I noticed Jack looking deeply uncomfortable. He was the only one who seemed to realize how incredibly disrespectful this whole thing was. "We can stay," he said suddenly. "To be honest, I don't even want to go to the theatre." Chloe shot him a lethal glare. "We are going, Jack. Those tickets were $100. I know exactly how much they cost." He fired back with a sudden flash of spine. "I bought them." Chloe rolled her eyes and went right back to her screen. I tried to pivot the conversation. "Chloe, I found some old photo albums. Maybe you'd want to take a look. There are pictures of you and your great-grandparents." Maybe some other time, Grandpa, she replied, never taking her eyes off the glowing glass. I have important emails with a client right now. I felt something snap inside my chest. After all these years, after all the love I had poured into this family, after every single sacrifice. At your age, I said, fighting to keep my voice from shaking, could you maybe show a little respect for your elders? Chloe finally looked up, her eyes flashing with pure annoyance. What is that supposed to mean? I mean, you are sitting at the table on your own grandfather's birthday, staring at your phone like you were dragged here at gunpoint. Chloe is working. Dad, Valerie jumped in. She has important clients, more important than her family. I shook my head. You used to love coming here, Chloe. Do you remember when we used to bake cookies and go feed the ducks at the park, Grandpa? I was 8 years old, she snapped, barely hiding her disgust. What changed? I grew up. I have my own life, a job, a husband. I turned to Jack. And what about you, son? I've been hearing about your dream of opening a hotel. Big plans, but zero action. Years of all talk and no walk. And it looks like Chloe is already sick of hearing about it, isn't she? Jack's face flushed deep red. Chloe leaped to her feet. How dare you, she screamed. You have no idea what we're going through. Jack works like a damn dog, and you... I saw her hand fly up, but I didn't have time to react. The slap burned across my cheek. My God, let's freeze for a second. The physical humiliation is brutal, yes. But look at the behaviour of the rest of the room. The complicit silence of the daughter and son-in-law hurts 1,000 times more than the granddaughter's strike. In psychology, this kind of silence validates the abuser and destroys the victim. Put yourselves in my shoes for a second. Would you have kept your cool? Or would you have thrown every single one of them out on the street in that exact millisecond? The room dropped into absolute dead silence. I stared at my granddaughter, unable to process what had just happened. Then I looked at Valerie, at Frank. Not one of them said a single word to defend me. Jack looked shell-shocked, but he stayed quiet too. My cheek was on fire, but the inside of my chest felt like a crater. My own granddaughter had struck me on my birthday, and nobody had even tried to stop her. Chloe Valerie finally spoke up. Apologize to your grandfather. I will not, she shot back, snatching her purse. He started it. I'm getting out of here. And she stormed out the front door. Jack stood up awkwardly. Mr. Vance, he started. Go after her, I said quietly. She's your wife. He hesitated for a second, then nodded and hurried out. Valerie and Frank traded a look. Dad Valerie sighed. You know how Chloe's temper is. You shouldn't have provoked her. Provoked her? I cut in. I was just telling the truth. That wasn't the truth. That was just your opinion, Frank said. And anyway, we really should get going or we'll be late. They walked out, totally forgetting to take the rest of the cake. They didn't hug me goodbye, and they didn't wish me a happy birthday again. They just left, like I was a total stranger whose visiting hours were up. After they left, I stood frozen for a long time. My cheeks still stung from the hit. 76 years. I had worked half my life to provide for my daughter. I had spent a fortune on my granddaughter, and this was the payoff. A slap to the face on my own birthday. I got up and walked into the kitchen. The barely touched cake sat on the table, a pathetic monument to a ruined party. Right next to it was the electric razor, an exact clone of the one I already owned. I opened the trash can and threw them both in. Walking back into the living room, I noticed the photo album on the floor. The one Chloe hadn't even wanted to open. It had been knocked off the table during the fight. I picked it up and flipped through the pages. Here was Chloe at 3, sitting on my lap, laughing, pointing at a storybook. Here at 6, holding a fishing pole with a tiny fish dangling from the hook, her first catch. Here at 12, already looking past the camera like she couldn't care less about being in a family picture. When did she stop being that sweet little girl? When did we lose each other? I closed the album and shoved it back on the shelf. What was the point of holding on to memories from a time that was never coming back? Outside, the rain started to fall. The drops hammered against the roof, drumming out a miserable melody that perfectly matched my mood. I sank into my recliner and closed my eyes. A birthday. How ironic. The silence in the house was suffocating. To drown out the sound of the rain and my own loneliness, I clicked on the old TV. The local news was on. At first, I wasn't paying attention. My brain was still trapped in the echo of Chloe's slap inside my own house on my birthday. Suddenly, the anchor's voice grabbed me, and the Lottery Commission is still searching for the lucky winner. The winning ticket was sold exactly 3 weeks ago at our local supermarket. Tonight's massive jackpot has yet to be claimed. I froze. 3 weeks ago, at the supermarket. Something clicked in my brain. Spare change at the register. A ticket bought on pure impulse. I shot out of my chair, ignoring the grinding in my knees. I practically sprinted to my desk. I ripped open the drawer where I kept my important papers. I frantically dug through old receipts and cancelled checks. There it was, a tiny slip of printed paper. I had completely forgotten about it. I looked up at the TV screen. The winning numbers were flashing in massive font. I looked down at my ticket. The first number matched. The second one, too. My breathing hitched. The third, the fourth, the fifth. I felt the blood completely drain from my face. The final number was identical. 6 zeros on the line. An absolute mind-bending fortune. I collapsed back into the chair. My hands were shaking violently. I checked the numbers again and again. It was real. I, Arthur Vance, had just won more money than I had ever seen in my entire life. My first instinct was to call Valerie, to tell them about my incredible luck. Maybe they'd treat me differently now. But then I remembered Chloe's slap. I remembered how they all just stood there in silence, letting it happen. I remembered how fast they bolted so they wouldn't be late for their stupid play. And I decided not to call. Not yet. I leaned back in my chair, gripping the ticket until my knuckles turned white. For the first time in years, a smile crept across my lips, and it had absolutely nothing to do with joy. All right, family, we've hit the halfway point of our journey. Take a sip of water, take a deep breath, because the atmosphere just shifted completely. We are no longer the helpless victim. We are putting on the strategist's crown. What comes next is a mental chess game that will leave you absolutely breathless. Sometimes life hands you bizarre gifts. Today, it hadn't just handed me the agonizing pain of my family's betrayal, but also an unexpected opportunity, a chance to completely rewrite the rules of the game. I stared at the winning ticket between my trembling fingers and thought about everything I could do with that kind of cash. For instance, helping an ambitious young man open the hotel of his dreams. A man who, unlike my own flesh and blood, had actually shown me a shred of human respect. The day after my birthday, I woke up feeling like it was day one of a brand new life. The lottery ticket was sitting on my nightstand, next to a notepad where I had scribbled down the winning amount. I had put them there before going to sleep, just to prove to myself I wasn't dreaming when I woke up. The number on the paper hadn't changed. 6 zeros, preceded by a digit that instantly morphed me from a penny-pinching retiree into a man who could buy almost anything he wanted. The first thing I did was drive to the main lottery office, which luckily was only a 2-hour drive from town. The whole ride there, my stomach was in knots, terrified there had been some sort of glitch. But there wasn't. The young woman behind the glass checked my ticket, ran my ID, and confirmed the win. I was escorted into the manager's office, where I filled out a mountain of paperwork. "Do you want to go public with your win?" the manager asked. "We usually do a press release, take a photo with a giant check. It's great PR for the lottery." I thought about Valerie. I thought about Chloe. About how incredibly fast they'd find out about my jackpot if my face was plastered all over the news. How quickly they'd magically remember how much they loved their dear old dad and grandpa. "No," I answered firmly. "I prefer to remain completely anonymous. Looking back from the present, this is the exact moment I take the power back. Silence is a devastating psychological weapon. If I told them about the money, their love would have come rushing back, but it would have been a counterfeit love, bought and paid for with cash. By withholding the information, I build a fortress and set the stage. Anonymity isn't fear, it's pure tactical control." The manager nodded. He'd seen guys like me before. Cautious, older men, terrified of sudden spotlights. He had no idea what my real motive was. "How would you like the funds dispersed? We can issue a check or wire it straight to a bank account." "An account, please. And I'd like to sit down with a financial advisor. I'm not exactly used to handling this kind of capital." He smiled knowingly. "Of course, Mr. Vance. We have several trusted advisors who work exclusively with our winners. I'll get you their contact info." 2 hours later, I walked out of the lottery headquarters, holding a thick folder of documents and feeling a bizarre sense of unreality about everything that was happening. My bank account now held a balance I'd only ever seen in movies about Wall Street billionaires. Driving back to town, my mind was racing with my next move. Valerie hadn't called to check on me after yesterday's disaster. Not a single one of them had called. It was like the slap had never even happened. The second I walked through my front door, I called Ian Harris, the financial advisor from the lottery's shortlist. We set up a meeting for the very next day. Then I sat down in my chair and finally let the reality wash over me. I was rich, filthy rich, and nobody in my family had a clue. The idea about Jack didn't hit me right away. At first, I just wanted to punish all of them. Keep the money a secret, let them keep treating me like a worthless burden, and let them find out way down the road exactly what they threw away. But slowly a blueprint started coming together. I remembered the look on Jack's face when Chloe hit me, his clumsy attempt to apologize, the vicious way Chloe had mocked his hotel dream, and I thought, what if I spent the next few days in deep meetings with Ian Harris and a team of financial guys? They helped me map out an investment strategy, open blind accounts, and lock down my principal capital. One of my first purchases was a top-of-the-line smartphone. It was time to ditch the ancient flip phone. I needed to be plugged in and have total control over the operation brewing in my head. Valerie didn't bother calling until a full week after my birthday. Her voice had that usual edge of mild annoyance, like checking on me was just another chore to cross off her list. "Dad, how are you?" she asked, barely faking the interest. "Oh, I'm doing just fine," I answered coldly. "Look about what happened. Chloe was out of line, but you know how impulsive she is. And you really hit a nerve with those comments about Jack. No apology. No admitting that what happened was totally unacceptable, just cheap excuses." "I get it," I said, biting down hard on my anger. "How is Jack doing?" "What?" She clearly wasn't expecting that pivot. "Oh, he's fine, I guess. He and Chloe are going through a rough patch, but that's their business." "Sure," I agreed. "Tell them I said hello." After hanging up, I sat down at my computer. Another early purchase had been a high-end laptop. My old brick could barely load an email. Now I could actually use the internet to dig up intel, and the very first thing I searched for was the motel where Jack worked. The Pines Motel turned out to be a depressing little roadside joint on the edge of the city. Judging by the online reviews, it was nothing special. Bare-bones amenities, decent enough cleaning, cheap rates. A standard pit stop for truckers and folks on a tight budget. The next day I rented a car and drove into the city. I parked across the street from the motel and waited. At 3 in the afternoon, Jack walked out of the main office, tall, thin, looking absolutely exhausted. He got into his beat-up sedan and pulled away. I tailed him, keeping a safe distance. He pulled into a small coffee shop and went inside. I gave him 5 minutes, then followed him in. He was sitting alone at a corner table by the window, his laptop open in front of him. I ordered a black coffee and sat where I had a clear line of sight to his screen. He was scrolling through commercial real estate listings. That confirmed my gut feeling. Jack was still grinding away at his dream, completely ignoring Chloe's toxic mocking. I watched him for another half hour, then slipped out without making a scene. Over the next week, I learned more about Jack Nolan than my own granddaughter probably knew. He worked at the Pines 5 days a week, 9 to 5. Every Tuesday and Thursday after his shift, he hit that same coffee shop to scour real estate ads and crunch numbers. He lived in a tiny apartment on the outskirts of town, in a pretty rough neighborhood based on the surroundings. His car was easily 10 years old. I also figured out that he and Chloe weren't living together anymore. One night, while I was keeping tabs on him, I saw Chloe hauling boxes out of his apartment. They were screaming at each other in the parking lot. I could hear her voice clear across the asphalt. "You're 34 years old, Jack. How much longer are you going to cling to this pathetic fantasy?" So that was it. Chloe had dumped him because his ambitions weren't paying off fast enough. My granddaughter chose cold, hard practicality over standing by her husband. Like they say, the apple never falls far from the tree. Looking back from the present, this is the exact moment I take the power back. Silence is a devastating psychological weapon. If I told them about the prize, their love would have come rushing back, but it would have been a counterfeit love, bought with cash. By withholding the information, I build a fortress and set the stage. Anonymity isn't fear, it's pure tactical control. 2 weeks into my private investigation, I decided I had enough intel. It was time to pull the trigger. I called the Pines Motel and asked for the manager. Jack picked up. "Mr. Nolan," I said, deliberately using a stiff, formal tone. "This is Arthur Vance, Chloe's grandfather." There was a dead silence on the line. "Mr. Vance?" He sounded totally thrown off. "How can I help you?" "I need to speak with you about a personal matter, but not over the phone." Okay. When?" "Today, if possible. I can come by the motel after you clock out." Another pause. Yeah, sure. I finish at 5. Perfect. I'll see you at 5:30. And Jack Chloe doesn't need to know about this meeting. Goodbye. Goodbye. I rolled into the motel parking lot at 5:15 and waited in the rental. At exactly 5:30, Jack stepped out of the office and scanned the lot. I waved him over and stepped out of the car. Mr. Vance, he shook my hand. I have to admit, your call threw me for a loop. I bet. Is there somewhere private we can talk? He led me into a cramped back office behind the front desk. We sat down at a small table facing each other. Mr. Vance, if this is about what happened at your birthday party, I want to apologize. I should have stepped in and stopped Chloe. I waved it off. No, that's not what this is about, Jack. And please, call me Arthur. He nodded, clearly completely lost. I heard you and Chloe split up, I said, cutting straight to the bone. His face tightened. Yeah, we had a fundamental disagreement about the future. About your hotel. He looked at me, stunned. Yeah. Chloe thinks it's a pipe dream, that I'm blowing my time and energy playing pretend instead of building a real career. And what do you think? Jack sat up straighter. I know I can pull it off. I have the business plan, the marketing strategy, the financials. I just need the seed capital. How much? What? How much do you need to get the doors open? He rattled off a massive number, but to me, it was barely a fraction of my winnings. Why don't you just get a small business loan? I tried, he smiled bitterly. 3 different times, but with 0 collateral and my credit history. The banks look at the hospitality business as way too high risk for a rookie. I nodded slowly, pretending to weigh the options, even though my mind had been made up for 2 weeks. If you had the cash right now, what's your first move? His eyes lit up like a flare. There's an old boarding house over on Maple Avenue, built back in the 90s, beautiful Victorian bones. 3 stories, 12 rooms. It needs a massive gut job, but structurally, the building is rock solid. It hit the market 2 months ago. I've already met with the owner and walked the property. It is the absolute perfect location for the exact vibe I want to create. I sat back and listened as he mapped out his vision. A high-end boutique hotel, individually curated rooms, a private library for guests, chef-driven breakfasts. His face came alive, his voice dropping an octave with pure confidence. This was a totally different guy, not the quiet, beaten-down son-in-law I was used to seeing. Sounds incredibly ambitious, I told him, when he finally took a breath, and I had to hand it to him. It was bulletproof. Thank you. He looked down, suddenly embarrassed. But I'm sorry, Arthur, I really don't understand why you're asking me all this. I took a deep breath. It was showtime. Jack, a few weeks ago, I hit the lottery. A very, very substantial amount of money. His eyes went wide. Congratulations, he said, almost on autopilot. I haven't told a single soul, not Valerie, not Chloe, nobody. Why not? Because of what happened at your party. I shook my head. Let's just say I'm in no rush to share a massive windfall with people who look at me like a piece of trash. He dropped his gaze. I get it. But you, Jack, you've always treated me like a human being. You actually listened to my stories, even those boring old rants about my days at the freight yard. He looked up, and I saw genuine surprise in his eyes. They weren't boring. My dad worked in logistics too. I grew up listening to stories exactly like that. I had no idea. Another crazy coincidence. Another flashing sign that I was making the exact right play. Jack, I want to fund your hotel. He froze, like his brain had just short-circuited. What? You heard me. I will write the check to buy and gut that building on Maple Avenue, plus cover your operating costs for year 1. But why? Because I believe in your blueprint, and because I want to teach my family a lesson they will never forget. I know a lot of you are sitting there wondering if this is just pure revenge, and honestly, yeah, it's got a heavy dose of payback. But there is something much deeper operating under the hood here. It's the primal human need to find a spiritual heir. Jack gives me the respect that my own blood denies me. Sometimes your real family isn't built on DNA, it's built on loyalty and shared values. He sat there for a long time chewing on what I had just dropped on him. That is an incredibly generous offer, Arthur, but I can't just take your money. It's not a handout, Jack, it's an investment. I will be a silent partner with an equity stake in the LLC. We'll draw up ironclad contracts with lawyers, the whole 9 yards. And Chloe will find out. Not right away. I want you to close on the building, start swinging hammers, and get the business totally operational. We do not flip our cards until the hotel is ready to open its doors. Jack rubbed his jaw, his wheels spinning. I don't know, Arthur. This feels like a revenge play. Doesn't the way they treated me warrant a little payback, I countered? Think about it, Jack. This is your shot to build your empire, to prove to Chloe that you were right all along. And yeah, to teach them a lesson. You cannot treat people like garbage and expect zero fallout, especially family. He stared at the desk. I need time to think about this. Absolutely, I said, standing up. Here is my card with my new private cell number. Call me when you've made your choice. Walking out of that motel, I felt a bizarre wave of absolute calm. The first domino had been pushed. Now I just had to wait. Jack called me exactly 48 hours later. I'm in, he said, skipping the small talk. But I have conditions. Let's hear them. First, this is a legitimate venture capital play, not a charity case. You get an equity stake directly proportional to your capital injection. That's fair. Second, we put everything in ink with corporate attorneys, exactly like you said. Done. And third, he paused. I want us to tell Chloe the truth before we officially launch. I don't want to blindside her with a public humiliation. I chewed on that for a second. On one hand, it took a little sting out of my revenge. On the other, it was a totally stand-up request. All right, Jack, we read her in 1 week before the grand opening, but not one single day sooner. We have a deal. We met the very next morning at the sleek offices of my new attorney, Andrew Pierce. Ian Harris, my money guy, was sitting at the table too. We hammered out the operating agreement. I was bankrolling Jack's vision in exchange for 40% of the LLC. Jack was rolling in his life savings, his sweat equity, and taking the reins as managing partner with 60%. I need a name for the legal entity, Andrew said, typing up the articles of incorporation. Jack looked at me. Got any ideas, Arthur? I thought about it for a beat. Second Chance, I said finally. Let's call it Second Chance Investments. Jack smiled, instantly catching the hidden meaning. I love it. We signed the paperwork and I wrote the check. The machine was officially in motion. The next few weeks turned into an absolute blur of adrenaline. Jack quit his miserable job at the motel, which triggered a massive blowout with Chloe. She called me, screaming about how reckless he was. He just walked out Grandpa. He doesn't have another job lined up. He has zero backup plan. He just mumbled something about chasing his dream. He's 34, acting like a toddler. I hummed sympathetically, pretending to validate her outrage, while inside I was popping champagne. The operation was running smoother than I ever dreamed. Jack closed the deal with the owner of the Maple Avenue property, and demolition started immediately. I drove out to the site almost every day, watching the dusty old boarding house get ripped down to the studs. Jack had killer taste and a razor-sharp vision. Under his command, the building started breathing again, keeping its killer Victorian bones, but getting wired with bleeding-edge modern tech. We spent hours in the trenches together, arguing over floor plans, picking out fixtures, and interviewing contractors. I realized I was actually having the time of my life. And I really liked Jack. He was sharp, relentless, and possessed by his vision. I started seriously wondering what the hell Chloe was blind to. One afternoon, after a brutal 10-hour day on site, we were sitting at a dive bar down the street, going over the blueprints. "Arthur," Jack said, peeling the label off his beer bottle, "I need you to know something. I am not doing this to get back at Chloe or to try and win her over." "Who are you doing it for?" "For me, to prove to myself that I'm not crazy. That this dream was actually worth all those years of eating dirt and saving pennies." He paused. "And for you, because you bet on me when literally everyone else tapped out." I felt a sudden heavy warmth in my chest. This wasn't just a revenge plot anymore. It was mutating into something real. A genuine bond. A total reset. "You know, Jack," I told him, "I used to lay awake dreaming about launching my own freight fleet, but I never pulled the trigger. Why not? Because of duty. Because of my family. Because I was terrified of going bankrupt." I shrugged. The usual excuses. "And do you regret it?" "Sometimes, especially when the corporate suits liquidated the company. And I realized that 40 years of bleeding for them meant absolutely nothing to the new board." Jack nodded slowly. "Is that why you're backing me? To live out your ghost dream through my hustle?" I asked myself that very question. Maybe a little bit, maybe. But mostly because when I look at you, I see the one thing I never had. The absolute guts to bet the house on your vision, no matter what anyone else says. We sat there until last call, talking about margins, life regrets, and ambition, and I realized my cold-blooded payback had evolved into a legitimate brotherhood forged in mutual respect. 3 months into the build, with the hotel actually looking like a hotel, Chloe showed up at the site completely unannounced. Apparently, she had been stalking Jack's movements and decided to crash the party to see what he was up to. I was standing in the lobby that afternoon, arguing with the interior designer about the millwork. Jack was upstairs running interviews for the front desk staff. "Grandpa." Her voice cut through the noise, dripping with confusion. "What are you doing here?" I spun around, slapping on a shocked face. "Chloe, what a surprise." Her eyes darted from me to the designer, then to the drywall guys hauling sheets down the hall. "What the hell is going on here? Is this Jack's hotel?" "Yes," I answered coolly. "It's his project." "But how?" she stammered. "Where did he get the capital?" "He landed a venture backer." "Who?" Right on cue, Jack appeared at the top of the stairs. He froze when he saw her. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice dropping to a dead flat tone. "I followed you," she admitted, totally shameless. "I wanted to see what kind of psychotic break made you walk away from a steady paycheck." She waved her hand at the grand staircase. And here it is. You actually conned some idiot into bankrolling your little fantasy. Jack walked slowly down the stairs and stood shoulder to shoulder with me. It is not a fantasy, Chloe. It's a corporation. Backed by a bulletproof business plan, aggressive market positioning, and hard financials. All the things I tried showing you for years while you rolled your eyes. She shook her head in disbelief. And who is this phantom investor? Some gullible boomer you sweet-talked into draining his 401k. Jack glanced at me. I gave him a microscopic nod. It was time to pull back the curtain, just not all the way. The primary investor prefers to remain strictly anonymous, Jack said smoothly, but he is fully aligned with my operational vision. I cannot believe this, Chloe whispered. You're actually doing it. You're building your stupid little hotel. Yes, Chloe, I am. And you want to know the best part? It's going to print money. Because I believe in the model, and my partner believes in the model. She stared him down for 5 agonizing seconds, then snapped her eyes to me. And you, Grandpa, do you actually buy into this garbage? I held her stare without blinking. Yes, Chloe. I believe in Jack. And I believe in this property. She shook her head, like her brain couldn't process the math. You two are completely out of your minds, she finally spat out, spinning on her heels. She stopped at the front doors and looked back over her shoulder. Don't come crawling to me when this whole house of cards collapses, Jack. I warned you. What a wildly revealing scene. When a narcissist loses control of the narrative, their only weapon left is pure contempt and denial. Chloe physically cannot handle the reality that Jack might actually build an empire without her permission. I watch her reaction, and I see pure glass-jawed fragility dressed up as arrogance. It is the ultimate defense mechanism of someone who deep down in their gut knows they just made a catastrophic error. After the door slammed shut, Jack and I just looked at each other. Well, I told him the first round is on the house tonight. He managed a weak smile. Is she going to find out the truth eventually? Oh, absolutely, but on our turf and on our timeline. We got back to the grind, but I noticed Jack was stuck in his own head for the rest of the shift. That night, as we were finalizing the vendor list for the restaurant, he finally let it out. Arthur, are you sure we're playing this right? I mean, not the business, but with Chloe, with your family. I looked at him for a long time, weighing my answer. You know, Jack, when I first pulled the trigger on this, I wanted blood. I wanted to teach them a lesson, prove to them they couldn't just walk all over me and get away with it. And now I looked around the nearly finished lobby, taking in the rich leather chairs, the restored antique front desk, the warm amber lighting. Now I just want to see those doors open. I want to see your vision go live. And I want to be standing right there next to you when it happens. Jack nodded slowly. Then let's make it bulletproof, he said, his eyes locking in with absolute focus. I never in a million years thought I'd be launching a startup at 76. But life has a funny way of dealing the cards. Jack and I threw ourselves into the grind with an adrenaline I hadn't felt in decades. The decaying Victorian boarding house on Maple Avenue was meticulously transforming into the elite boutique hotel Jack had drafted in his head. After all the ink dried and the escrow closed, the brutal part started. The gut and rebuild. The property built way back in the 20s still had its killer historical bones, but it needed a massive infrastructure upgrade. We hired an architect who specialized in historic preservation and a GC crew that actually knew what they were doing. Every single morning, I was on site by 8 a.m. sharp, even though my internal clock still kicked me awake at 5. Jack was usually already there, arguing with the subs or holding up paint swatches to the morning light. His obsession with the details was terrifying in the best way possible. He micromanaged everything, from the weight of the brass door handles to the brutal efficiency of the new HVAC system. "Arthur," Jack yelled out one morning as I walked into what was going to be the grand lobby. "Look what I dug out of a salvage yard." He held up a massive tarnished brass plaque that read "The Maple Inn." It was the original signage from a century ago that some previous owner had ripped down and tossed in a basement. "It's flawless," I said, running my hand over the heavy metal. "We're mounting it right here in the lobby. Yeah, dead center over the fireplace. A nod to the ghosts who built this place." We worked shoulder to shoulder, and I was shocked to realize how much my decades on the freight docks actually applied here. I was routing supply trucks, crushing bottlenecks, keeping the paper trail spotless. Jack started calling me his logistics sniper. "If you weren't running point, we'd have blown past 3 hard deadlines by now," he told me once. Right after I caught a massive screw-up with a lighting shipment and had the supplier overnight the correct fixtures before the electricians even noticed. The dynamic between us slowly morphed from a sterile business partnership into a trench-forged friendship. We constantly burned the midnight oil in the makeshift command center we set up in one of the unfinished suites, arguing over projections and life. I told him all about Claire, my grind at the shipping yards, my dead dream of owning my own fleet. "Why didn't you ever jump?" he asked me one night, leaning against the unfinished lobby bar, sipping cheap bourbon out of a paper cup. "Fear, I guess," I answered, staring into the amber liquid. I was the sole breadwinner. Valerie had just been born. Claire had quit her job to raise her. It just felt like too massive of a gamble. "I get it," Jack nodded. "You had mouths to feed." "Yeah, but it wasn't just that. I think I just lacked your killer instinct, your absolute blind faith in your own blueprint." He smiled, looking almost embarrassed. "I don't know if it's killer instinct. It's probably just pure stubbornness. Chloe always told me I was too damn stubborn for my own good. Sometimes stubbornness is exactly what it takes to move the needle," I told him, "especially when every single person around you is betting on you to fail." The build-out was moving at lightning speed. 4 months after demolition started, the heavy lifting was completely done. The property looked exactly like the rendering Jack had pitched me. Elite but intimate. Quiet luxury with a psychotic attention to detail. We had 12 exclusive suites, every single one custom designed and named after heavy-hitting authors. Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Steinbeck, Faulkner. The ground floor featured a tight, high-end restaurant, a private library loaded with leather chairs and a massive hearth, and an interior courtyard built around a restored fountain and imported greenery. We officially branded it the Maple Hotel, honoring its roots and the zip code. The branding, cooked up by some brilliant kid from the local design college, merged a minimalist maple leaf with the sharp angles of a Victorian roofline. 1 week out from our hard launch date, we were running the final stress tests. The staff was hired, trained, and hungry. 10 people total. Front desk, housekeeping, line cooks and servers. The booking engine was live. The reservations were already stacking up. I was sitting in the back office tearing through the final payroll projections when someone knocked. It was Isabel, our newly hired front desk manager. Mr. "Vance, you have a visitor out front," she said, looking a little nervous. "She says she's your granddaughter." My blood ran cold. This was the exact moment I had been waiting for and dreading for months. Had Chloe finally connected the dots on my capital, or was she just snooping around to see the finished product? "Send her back, please," I said quickly, squaring up the ledgers on my desk. 60 seconds later, Chloe stood in the doorway. She looked totally different from the last time she ambushed us. Highly polished, wearing a tailored designer suit and a fresh blowout. She was clearly dressed for a power play. "Grandpa," she said, flashing a highly engineered smile. "What a total surprise running into you here." I immediately knew she was lying through her teeth. She absolutely knew I was in the building. Chloe. I stood up, but I didn't offer a hug. "What brings you to the Maple Hotel?" I heard Jack's little project was finally ready to launch. She scanned the office with poorly hidden shock, and honestly, I have to admit, it's stunning. I never expected this level of execution. "Yeah, Jack knocked it out of the park," I said, keeping my own involvement completely off the radar. "And you? Are you on the payroll?" she asked, testing the waters. "You could say I'm consulting." She nodded, buying the deflection. "Grandpa, I need to talk to you. And Jack too, if he's around. He's in the kitchen running menu tastings with the executive chef. You want me to pull him out?" "Yes, please." I dialed Jack's cell. He picked up on the second ring. "Yeah, Arthur, did something blow up?" "No, but we have a walk-in. Chloe is in the office and she wants a sit-down with both of us." Dead silence. "I'll be there in 5. While we waited, Chloe nervously twisted the strap of her Prada bag. "How long have you been consulting for him?" she finally asked. "Since day 1 of the build." "And how did you even know what he was doing?" I let a razor-thin smile cross my face. Trade secret. The door clicked open and Jack walked in. He gave Chloe a curt nod, projecting absolutely zero warmth. "Chloe," he said, his voice pure ice, "to what do we owe the pleasure?" She squared her shoulders, slipping into pitch mode. "I came here to apologize," she said, locking eyes with Jack, then me. "To both of you. I was completely out of line. I didn't believe in your model, Jack. And I acted like an absolute monster at your birthday party, Grandpa." I stared at her, scanning for even a trace of actual remorse behind the rehearsed corporate speak. Her eyes were calculating. Her cadence was entirely artificial. Jack clocked it instantly, too. "What changed the math?" "Chloe?" he asked, completely deadpan. "You spent years telling me this hotel was a hallucination that would bankrupt us. And now that the paint is dry and the lights are on, you suddenly want to clear the air." A faint flush crept up her neck. "Well, I realized my blind spots. I realized I made a bad call. And I'm sure it has absolutely zero to do with the fact that the property is an undeniable triumph," I added, twisting the knife just a fraction. Chloe shot me a lethal look. "Grandpa, I am trying to repair the damage here. Isn't that what you've been begging for? For this family to actually act like a family? Being a family isn't just showing up when the checks start clearing." "Chloe, it's about taking the hits together when the bank account is empty." She looked down at the floor. "I know. And I am so sorry I didn't back your play." Jack watched her, his face an absolute volt. "What is your ask, Chloe?" he finally said. "Why are you actually standing in my office?" She took a deep breath. "I want us to reconcile, Jack. I made a massive tactical error. I should have trusted your vision. I should have been your partner in this. Let's run a critical analysis on this apology. This is not genuine remorse for inflicting pain. This is the absolute terror of missing out on the IPO. It is textbook opportunist syndrome. When the hurricane is over and the galleon is safely docked and loaded with gold, suddenly everyone wants to be the first mate. I ask you, would you hand a second chance to someone who only walks through the door when the risk is zero? I want a second chance." Jack just stood there for 10 agonizing seconds, letting the silence suffocate the room. Then he shifted his eyes to me. I gave him a microscopic shake of my head. I wasn't buying a single word of it. He gave me a fraction of a nod back. He wasn't buying it either. "Chloe," he finally said, his tone utterly clinical. "I hear your apology, but the metrics have changed. I have changed. Building this company rewired me completely. We can reboot." She pushed, her voice tightening. "I can step in. I have high-level marketing experience. I have serious leverage in the local ad space." "We already have an aggressive marketing rollout," Jack countered, "and an agency of record that I trust implicitly. But I am your wife." A raw edge of panic finally cracked through her polish. "Ex-wife," he corrected her without blinking. "You filed the papers, remember?" She shot me a desperate look, begging for an assist. I gave her absolutely nothing. "Jack, please," her voice broke. "Give me a runway to prove I've pivoted." He let out a slow exhale. "Look, I don't harbour any toxic resentment. I really don't. But right now, my sole bandwidth is dedicated to this launch. That is my only priority." "I can be an asset to the launch," she said, closing the distance between them. "We can run the board together." "No, Chloe." His voice dropped to a hard baseline. "I already have a partner." She stared at him, totally derailed, then whipped her head toward me. "A partner? You mean your VC backer?" "Yes," Jack answered. "A man who put his capital on the line when literally everyone else laughed in my face." I could practically see her processor melting down as she tried to run the variables. "And who exactly is this ghost investor?" she asked, her smile looking like shattered glass. Jack looked at me. I remembered our gentleman's agreement to read her in before the launch, but looking at the sheer calculating arrogance radiating off her, I knew the timing was wrong. I locked eyes with Jack and gave him an almost invisible shake of the head. Not yet. I wanted the detonation to happen in front of the entire family. Jack read the audible perfectly. He's a private equity guy who prefers to stay off the radar for now, he answered smoothly. "You'll formally meet him at the VIP launch. You're on the list, obviously." Chloe's face flushed a deep, furious red. She realized she had completely lost leverage of the room. She gripped her Prada bag like a weapon. "Have it your way, Jack. Let's see how long your little startup survives the real world," she hissed. She spun around and marched out of the executive office without even looking in my direction. When the door clicked shut, Jack and I shared a long, loaded look. The chessboard was set. It was time for the end game. The day of the VIP launch at the Maple Hotel was crisp and clear despite the heavy autumn chill. I woke up early like always, but this time my chest was buzzing with pure adrenaline instead of the usual morning dread. Today was the day, the absolute climax of months of grinding, bleeding, and plotting. The day our empire officially went public. I had prepped for this moment like a general going to war. I bought a bespoke midnight blue suit tailored perfectly with a matching vest and silk tie. Claire always used to say that deep blue made my eyes look like lasers. For the first time in a decade, I sat in a high-end barber's chair and had them professionally edge up my fading grey hair. I even let them give me a manicure, a ridiculous luxury I would have scoffed at a year ago. Jack pulled up to my place at 10 a.m. sharp. He looked completely unrecognizable from the broken guy sitting at my dining table all those months ago. He radiated pure, lethal confidence. Spine straight, eyes locked in. His suit looked like armor, tailored tight to his tall frame. "Arthur, you look like $1,000,000, he said, genuinely impressed. "Look in the mirror, kid," I shot back, taking him in. "You look like a hotel mogul." He flashed a grin, and there was so much raw pride in that smile that it actually hit me in the chest. We did it. We really pulled it off, riding in the car. We ran through the final logistics. The VIP list was capped at 100 bodies. Local heavyweights, tourism board directors, regional press, and high net worth potential investors. The tactical prep had been locked down the night before. The grand lobby was staged, the catering stations were prepped, and the vintage champagne was on ice. "Did you put your family on the list?" Jack asked carefully as we pulled up to the valet. I nodded. Valerie swore she was coming with Frank, and Chloe will absolutely be there. I'd bet my life on it. She wouldn't miss a high-status networking event if the building was on fire. "Are you absolutely certain you want to pull the pin tonight?" I could hear the slight edge of worry in his voice. "Going public with the cap table." 100%, I answered without hesitation. "It's time." The Maple Hotel looked like a masterpiece. The restored Victorian brickwork looked sharp and aggressive against the sky. The massive floor-to-ceiling windows caught the morning sun, and the sleek new branding on the brass signage demanded attention from every car on the avenue. We had a red carpet rolled out to the curb, flanked by two sharp-looking valets ready to pull doors. Inside the lobby was engineered to drop jaws. Massive installations of fresh orchids, warm architectural lighting, and a live string quartet laying down a sophisticated bass line. The staff, crisp in their custom uniforms, were moving with military precision, running the final punch lists. "Mr. Nolan, Mr. Vance," Isabel, our front desk director, intercepted us. "We are green across the board. VIPs start hitting the doors in 30 minutes. "Excellent work, Isabel," Jack answered. "The staging looks flawless." She practically glowed at the feedback and hustled back to the desk. "You got the jitters?" I asked Jack when we were out of earshot. "A little bit," he admitted. "You? Weirdly, no," I answered. Totally deadpan. I feel completely locked in, like every single piece is exactly where it's supposed to be. He nodded, totally getting it. "I have something for you, Arthur," he said, pulling a small velvet box out of his jacket. "I wanted to hand this off before the circus starts." I popped the lid. Inside was a pair of heavy cufflinks, minimalist, brutalist elegance, forged in sterling silver with a deep midnight blue stone inlay. "It's lapis lazuli," Jack explained. "Old superstition says it guarantees victory in new ventures." It hit me hard. It had been decades since anyone handed me a gift that actually required thought. "Thank you, Jack," I said, sliding the heavy silver through my cuffs. "They look lethal with the suit." "Glad you like them," he smiled. "One more thing. Do I have a green light to drop the bomb during my keynote? to go on the record that you didn't just consult, but that you are the primary equity partner. Green light all the way, I answered. In fact, I'm banking on it. The heavy hitters started rolling in right at noon. Jack and I held down the front doors, shaking hands and kissing babies. The mayor, the publisher of the city paper, commercial developers, and local sharks. A lot of them did a double take, seeing me working the door as a host, but Jack expertly deflected, introducing me as his associate and leaving the heavy details in the dark. At 1:30, I spotted Valerie and Frank walking through the brass doors. They looked incredibly stiff and were visibly thrown off seeing me standing shoulder to shoulder with Jack. Valerie made a beeline for us. "Dad," she sounded totally destabilized. "What exactly is going on here? Chloe told us you were somehow consulting for this place." But I assumed she was just being dramatic. "Hello, Valerie." I gave her a polite, sterile kiss on the cheek. "Glad you guys made it. Everything will make sense during the keynote." She opened her mouth to interrogate me, but right on cue, Chloe made her entrance. She was wearing a ruthless designer cocktail dress. She looked weaponized, exactly the way she always dressed when she wanted to dominate a room. Her eyes darted from Jack to me, rapidly running the threat assessment. Chloe. Jack greeted her with absolute 0 degrees of warmth. "Thanks for showing up. I wouldn't miss a launch like this for the world," she fired back with a razor-thin smile. "Especially after finding out my grandfather was dabbling in the project." "Not dabbling," I corrected her smoothly. "Directing. But we can circle back to that later. Go grab a drink and enjoy the show." By 2 o'clock, the lobby was packed to capacity. The crowd was buzzing, burning through the vintage champagne and the Wagyu appetizers. They were obsessing over the interior architecture and running numbers on the projected revenue. Jack was running tight, curated tours of the VIP suites for the heavy investors. Meanwhile, I was holding court with the local business owners, guys I used to deal with back in my freight days. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught Valerie and Frank huddled in a corner, whispering frantically and shooting me panicked looks. Chloe was working the room like a shark, trying to extract intel from the guests about my actual rank in the operation. I let a small, vicious smile slip. The curtain was about to drop. Right at 2:15, Jack tapped a spoon against a crystal flute, instantly killing the noise in the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he started, his voice projecting total authority. "I want to personally thank every single one of you for being in this room today. The launch of this property is the culmination of a vision I have been bleeding for over the last 5 years. The room erupted into applause, and Jack held his ground until it faded to dead silence. But I absolutely did not build this empire alone, and today I want to publicly recognize the man who made this entire operation a reality. The man who bet on me when every bank in the city laughed me out of their office. My co-founder and lead investor, Mr. Arthur Vance. He extended his hand toward me. I stepped into the center of the room as a shockwave of whispers and applause ripped through the crowd. In my peripheral vision, I watched Valerie, Frank, and Chloe's faces completely cave in. Arthur didn't just inject the capital to acquire this asset, Jack continued, projecting to the back of the room. He was in the trenches every single day, from the demolition to the final staging. His operational genius, his killer instincts, and his absolute ironclad faith were the backbone of this build. This hotel is our legacy, and it is the greatest honor of my career to call him my partner and my closest friend. The room exploded again, this time a standing ovation. I looked at the crowd and saw genuine, absolute respect burning in their eyes. It was a high I had never felt before. I was no longer the obsolete old man Vance. I was a player, a titan who had just executed a massive commercial coup. "Arthur, the floor is yours," Jack said, handing me the mic. I took a slow, deep breath. I had run this exact script in my head 1,000 times. "Thank you, Jack," I started, my voice echoing off the marble. "And thank you all for standing in this room with us today. The Maple Hotel is not just a commercial asset to us. It is a monument to the fact that it is never, ever too late to launch a second act. It is never too late to bet the house on a vision." I paused, letting the silence hang heavy. At 76 years old, I learned that the universe still holds massive curveballs, that you can find a new empire, a new brotherhood, and ultimate leverage when you least expect it. My eyes locked onto my family, pinned against the back wall. Valerie looked like she was going to pass out. Frank looked sick to his stomach. Chloe looked like she had just been hit by a freight train. Sometimes it takes a massive, unexpected windfall to expose exactly who values your blood and who is just waiting for you to die. I kept my voice dead level, staring right through my family. Sometimes it takes a radical shift in leverage to see who will stand in the trenches with you when you're bleeding and who only shows up when the champagne is flowing. I watched Chloe physically shrink, her eyes dropping to the marble floor. She knew exactly who the sniper was aiming at. This is the absolute climax. Detonating the truth in public carries a monumental psychological payload. I am not doing this to destroy them. I am doing it to draw a titanium boundary in front of witnesses. It is the ultimate catharsis after a decade of silent degradation. Watching the mask vaporize off the face of the person who abused you. I admit it generates a very dark satisfaction, but it is an absolutely necessary extraction to finally heal. A few months ago, I hit a massive jackpot in the state lottery. I projected over the mic, sending a secondary shockwave of frantic whispering through the elite crowd. And I made the executive decision to deploy that capital into the vision of a man who had never shown me anything but absolute respect. A man whose own wife actively tried to sabotage him when he needed her the most. The entire room physically pivoted, trying to spot the target of that strike. Chloe stood frozen against the wall. Her face was chalk white, completely paralyzed by the sheer public humiliation. "But this is not a revenge play," I said, dialing back the hostility in my cadence. "This is a case study in second chances, the capital to burn it all down and build something bulletproof in its place. And I am profoundly grateful for that leverage. Grateful to Jack for his killer vision and his loyalty. And grateful to every single one of you for backing our play." I raised my crystal flute. "Here is to the Maple Hotel. And to burning the boats." The crowd hoisted their glasses, echoing the toast with a roar. The applause was deafening. Jack pulled me into a massive hug, and I saw nothing but raw loyalty and fierce pride in his eyes. When the formal presentation wrapped, the crowd scattered across the property, touring the suites, the bar, and the library. I posted up in a corner of the grand lobby, taking handshakes and fielding aggressive networking pitches. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Valerie and Frank arguing viciously near the coat check. Chloe had completely vanished the second I handed back the mic. 10 minutes later, Valerie broke away from Frank and walked straight up to me. "Dad, she said, her voice shaking violently. We need an office, right now. I nodded and led her into a private boardroom off the main corridor. The second the heavy door clicked shut, Valerie spun around. Her face was a wreck of pain and absolute shock. Why didn't you brief us on any of this? She demanded. The lottery, the commercial real estate, all of it. Why didn't you pick up the phone the day after my birthday and ask if I was okay? I fired back, flipping the interrogation. Why did it take you 7 days to even address the fact that your daughter assaulted me in my own dining room while you stood there and watched? She dropped her eyes. We made a bad call, she whispered. Chloe was completely out of control, and we should have shut it down. But that does not justify blacking us out of a massive life event, doesn't it? I shook my head, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. Valerie, you have treated me like a depreciating liability for a decade. Clocking in for forced visits, staring at your watches until you could escape. Do you think I'm blind? Do you think I don't see Frank running cost-benefit analysis on the gas it takes to drive to my house? Do you think I don't see Chloe rolling her eyes every time I open my mouth? That is not true, she said, but her voice had absolutely zero structural integrity. It is the absolute truth, I countered, locking eyes with her. And you want to know the crazy part? I don't even blame you. You are operators. You have your own portfolios, your own stress. I was just an obsolete old man burning through your bandwidth. And that is a terrible ROI for a high-functioning family. Valerie broke. Silent, heavy tears started spilling down her face, and for a fraction of a second the corporate armor melted, and I saw the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders. We love you, Dad, she choked out. We are terrible at it, but we love you. I know, I said, dropping the hostility. But love isn't a press release, Valerie. It's logistics. It's showing up when the building is burning. It's basic human respect. How do we fix this? She asked, frantically wiping her face. How do we restructure this? I let out a long breath. I don't know if a full restructure is even possible, but we can start by wiping the cap table clean. No more forced obligations, no more fake visits. We only sit at the same table when both parties actually want to be there, not because the calendar mandates it. She nodded slowly, trying to pull a smile through the wreckage. I would really like that. We walked out of the boardroom together and merged back into the launch party. Frank was pacing aggressively by the bar. He looked furious that his wife's makeup was ruined. But before he could launch a complaint, Jack materialized next to us. Arthur, I hate to interrupt, but the mayor wants a sit-down to lock in the hotel for the city's annual gala. Send him to the office, I said. I turned to Valerie. We will debrief later. Understood? She nodded, and I walked off with Jack feeling a massive, unexpected weight lift off my chest. The first bridge had been built. Maybe not to a full merger. I wasn't even sure I wanted that, but definitely to a transparent, ruthless honesty. Chloe ambushed me an hour later. The heavy hitters had already cleared out and the stragglers were finishing their drinks at the bar. She looked completely stripped down, vulnerable. The titanium armor she always wore was totally gone. "Grandpa," she said, quietly stepping into my airspace, "do you have a minute?" We walked out onto the private terrace overlooking the courtyard. I was a toxic granddaughter, she said, skipping the PR spin and going straight to the bone. And I was a parasitic wife to Jack. I bet against him. I treated you like garbage, and I only ran the numbers for myself. I stayed silent, letting her bleed it out. When Jack pitched the hotel, I was on board. But the timeline was too slow. I got sick of bootstrapping a fantasy instead of scaling a reality. I wanted the status, the zip code, the leverage. I wanted the empire he couldn't deliver. And now? I asked her, my voice like flint. Now that he built the empire without you. She smiled a brutal, self-aware smirk. Now I'm locked out of the boardroom, and he is completely right to block me. I stared at her, running a threat assessment on her words. This time it felt completely raw. No angles, no hidden agenda. You know what, Chloe? I finally said. Sometimes the absolute most valuable ROI we get from a catastrophic failure is learning to never run that exact same play again, not with Jack, but with whoever comes next. She nodded, her eyes flashing with unshed tears. Message received, Grandpa. I just need it on the record that I am profoundly sorry. For the birthday, for the assault, for the entire campaign. My behavior was completely radioactive, and I have zero defense. Apology accepted, I told her, and I meant it. Take the data from this failure and pivot. Not for me, not for Jack, but to save yourself. She threw her arms around me, and I felt the last massive block of ice in my chest finally crack. Not all of it. Some structural damage is permanent, but enough of it broke away that I could finally take a full, deep breath. Chloe walked off the property shortly after. I stood alone on the terrace, watching the valet pull the last few cars. It had been a brutal, high-stakes operation of a day, but I felt totally, absolutely bulletproof. Jack stepped out onto the terrace a minute later, holding 2 heavy crystal glasses of single malt. "Did you survive the gauntlet?" he asked, handing me a glass. "I survived," I said, taking the scotch, and the casualty rate was acceptable. We stood there watching the city lights come up, drinking in the absolute silence of a conquered mountain. "You know, Arthur," Jack said softly, "when you first floated this term sheet, I thought it was purely a revenge acquisition. And now, I see it was a total system override. For what?" I asked, testing him. "A second act. For me to build the empire, for you to take the throne, and maybe even for your bloodline to realize exactly what kind of asset they let walk out the door." I nodded, letting the scotch burn down my throat. "They say revenge is a dish best served cold," I told him. But I just learned that even the most clinical hostile takeover doesn't feel half as good as building an absolute fortress from the ground up. "So you don't regret injecting your capital into my sheet instead of just bankrupting them?" "Not for a microsecond," I answered, looking him dead in the eye. "It was the highest yielding play I have made in my entire life." We clinked our heavy glasses in the dark, and a massive, quiet victory washed over me. It wasn't the cheap thrill of watching my enemies bleed. It was the absolute, unshakable power of a man who had finally built his own empire, surrounded by soldiers who actually had his back. In the quarters that followed, the Maple Hotel became a total juggernaut. The press was rabid, the suites were waitlisted for months, and the restaurant became the absolute epicenter for the city's elite. Jack and I practically lived on the property, constantly tweaking the operational model and scaling the revenue. I moved out of my house and took over a sleek private penthouse suite we built out right above the lobby. It was a tactical move to be close to the action, but it was also the ultimate flex. A new fortress for a new king. Valerie kept me on speed dial, and our debriefs became completely transparent. Sometimes she'd drop by for lunch without Frank, and we'd talk strategy for hours. We weren't a broken father and daughter anymore. We were two heavyweights negotiating a new treaty. Chloe executed a hard pivot. She relocated to a new market, got into heavy therapy, and started auditing her entire psychological framework. The dynamic between us was still highly guarded, but there was a mutual professional respect. Jack evolved from my managing partner into absolute family. He was the heir I never had. We didn't just run the board together, we took weekends off the grid, fished, played chess, and debated military history. I also built a tight inner circle with the local titans I met through the hotel. At 76, my network was more lethal than it had ever been. Sometimes, sitting in the leather chairs of the hotel library after midnight, watching the operation run like a Swiss watch, I'd think about Claire. What would she say if she saw the empire I built? I think she'd be floored. Not by the capital or the real estate. She'd be proud that I finally found the killer instinct to burn the boats, take the massive risk, and bet on myself. The hostile takeover I originally engineered mutated into the ultimate golden parachute. A second act loaded with extreme loyalty, massive leverage, and absolute purpose. And maybe that is the ultimate masterclass. Sometimes the operation you launched to destroy your enemies is the exact operation that ends up saving your life. As for my bloodline, they have to live with the brutal autopsy of their own failure. The absolute waking nightmare of knowing exactly what kind of empire they forfeited because they couldn't be bothered to show basic respect. But I genuinely hope they use the data. That Valerie learns loyalty is an action, not a calendar invite. That Chloe realizes a man's market cap doesn't dictate his actual value. And as for me, I am the one sitting at the head of the table. And it isn't the bitter, paranoid isolation of a vindictive tyrant. It is the absolute quiet dominance of a man living at the absolute peak of his power, surrounded by an army that would take a bullet for him. And that, at the end of the day, is the most ruthless, beautiful revenge on the market. And that closes the book on this chapter, my friends. If we run a deep diagnostic on this, the ultimate payback wasn't exposing his family in front of the city's elite. The most nuclear, devastating revenge you can inflict on people who treat you like a liability is to let them watch you build an absolute empire without them. Our protagonist weaponized their disrespect, turned it into high-octane rocket fuel, and completely hijacked his own destiny in the fourth quarter of his life. He proved that killer instinct doesn't have an expiration date, and that the family you build in the trenches is usually the one that saves you. Now I'm passing the mic to you. Drop into the comments and give me your read. What would your play have been? Would you have restructured the family dynamic after dropping the bomb? Or would you have locked them out of the building permanently? I read every single one. And if this case study rewired something in your brain, hit subscribe and ring that bell, because the operations we're breaking down next are even more lethal. See you in the next one.